Thomas Hayes leaned against the weathered post of the saloon porch, midday sun burning his neck as he observed the dusty main street of Fairhaven. A woman's scream sliced through the usual bustle of the frontier town, followed by an unnatural silence that made the hair on his arms stand up. Across the street, a tall woman in a faded blue dress stood rigid, clutching a worn leather purse to her chest. A man in a dirty bandana mask circled her like a coyote, knife glinting in the harsh Colorado sun. "Hand it over, lady," the masked man growled, loud enough for the gathering onlookers to hear. "Ain't no need for trouble." Thomas straightened, hand instinctively moving to his hip where his Colt usually rested. He'd left it in his room today, figuring a quiet drink wouldn't require protection. He was wrong. The woman's response wasn't what anyone expected. Instead of surrendering her purse, she swung it hard, connecting with her attacker's temple. The man staggered back, momentarily stunned. "You think because I'm a woman alone, I'm easy prey," she said, voice steady despite her trembling hands. "There's your mistake." The bandit recovered quickly, lunging forward with an angry snarl. He grabbed her arm, twisting it until she gasped, but instead of releasing the purse, she drove her knee upward, catching him in the stomach. They grappled in the street, dust swirling around their feet, the woman fighting with surprising ferocity. Thomas moved forward, ready to intervene. When the bandit's mask slipped, the face revealed belonged to one of Sheriff Lowell's deputies. The man, realizing he'd been exposed, shoved the woman hard to the ground and fled down an alley. As quickly as it had begun, the confrontation ended. Townsfolk who had watched without lifting a finger now returned to their business, some muttering disapproval at the woman's unladylike behavior. She knelt in the dirt, gathering scattered belongings that had spilled from her purse, a small trickle of blood at the corner of her mouth. Despite her disheveled appearance, there was a dignity in her movements that commanded respect. "That's my kind of woman," Thomas muttered, stepping back into the shadows as she rose and dusted off her skirts, head held high despite the whispers following her down the street. The livery stable smelled of fresh hay and old leather, a comforting scent that reminded Sarah Matthews of better days. Late afternoon shadows stretched across the yard as she examined her wagon wheel, heart sinking at the sight of deep notches cut deliberately into the spokes. "That wheel won't get you far," a deep voice observed from behind. She turned sharply to see the tall stranger from the saloon, the one who'd watched her fight without intervening, up close. His face showed the weathering of hard years, though his eyes remained clear and assessing. "I don't recall asking your opinion," she replied, instinctively clutching her purse tighter. He removed his hat, revealing streaks of gray and dark hair. "Name's Thomas Hayes. I've some skill with woodwork. Could have that repaired by morning, if you'd allow it. I can manage my own repairs." Sarah turned back to the wheel, though she knew little about fixing it. The livery owner appeared, wiping greasy hands on his apron. "Hayes here's done work for me before. Got honest hands, ma'am. And with that storm coming," he gestured to gathering clouds on the horizon. Thunder rumbled in the distance as Sarah weighed her options. Her sister's homestead was still a day's journey, and the wheel wouldn't last an hour. "Very well," she conceded, "but I'll pay fair price for honest work." Thomas nodded, already examining the damage. "Not charity I'm offering, ma'am." While he gathered tools, Sarah settled on a nearby bench, her purse never leaving her lap. She watched his movements, noting the practiced efficiency of a man accustomed to working with his hands. "What's in that purse worth dying for?" "Ma'am," he asked quietly, testing the wheel's strength. Sarah's fingers tightened around the worn leather. "Sometimes it's not what's worth dying for, but what's worth living for." Their eyes met briefly, a flash of understanding passing between them. Then Thomas returned to his work, hands steady as he began measuring replacement wood. Sarah felt the stares of passers-by, heard whispers about the wild woman who'd fought a man in the street. One woman pulled her child closer when Sarah looked her way. As the first raindrops began to fall, Sarah noticed 3 men watching from across the street. The bandit from earlier stood among them, his face now uncovered, a dark bruise forming where her purse had struck him. Thomas noticed too, his shoulders tensing as he worked faster. Best get inside. Mrs. Matthews. Looks like we've drawn an audience. Lantern light cast long shadows across the livery stable as rain drummed steadily on the roof. Sarah sat on a hay bale, watching Thomas's scarred hands working the wood. Each movement was deliberate, each cut precise. Those weren't the hands of an ordinary drifter. You have a destination in mind, Mrs. Matthews, Thomas asked, fitting a new spoke into place. Sarah hesitated. Trusting strangers wasn't a luxury she could afford, not after what happened in Willow Creek. But something about his steady presence loosened her guard. My sister has a homestead near Miller's Creek, she finally answered. Haven't seen her in 2 years. Thomas nodded without looking up. Long journey for a woman alone. Not by choice. Sarah smoothed her skirt. Circumstances in my previous town became untenable. You, meaning folks ran you out. There was no judgment in his tone. Something like that. She watched him work silently for a moment. And you, Mr. Hayes, what brings you to a place like Fairhaven? His hands paused briefly. Used to have a ranch west of here. Now I drift. Take odd jobs where I find them. What happened to your ranch? Lost it. His tone closed the subject. Along with everything else. The stable door creaked open, bringing a gust of rain-scented air and the imposing figure of Sheriff Lowell. Water dripped from his mustache as he surveyed the scene, eyes lingering on Sarah's purse. Heard about the disturbance earlier, he drawled. Quite the spectacle. They say... Sarah met his gaze evenly. Your deputy seemed to think my belongings were his for the taking. Now, I don't recall anyone identifying the man as my deputy. The sheriff smiled thinly. But this town has ways of dealing with troublesome women who don't know their place. And I have ways of dealing with men who don't know theirs. Sarah replied. Something dangerous flashed in the sheriff's eyes. He turned to Thomas. You vouching for this woman, Hayes? Thomas straightened, facing the sheriff. Just fixing her wheel, Sheriff, nothing more. After the sheriff departed, leaving puddles on the dirt floor. Thomas lowered his voice. Lowell's not a man to cross lightly. He runs this town to suit himself. I've met his kind before, Sarah said. The repairs will take till morning. Rain's made the woods swell. Thomas wiped his hands on a rag. You should find a room for the night. Sarah glanced toward the door where rain was falling harder. And if our friend returns with company, I'll stand watch. Thomas's hand moved to his belt where a Colt now rested. Get some rest, Mrs. Matthews. Tomorrow may prove challenging. Sarah nodded, suddenly aware of how their fates had become unexpectedly intertwined. Neither had sought this alliance, yet both recognized its necessity in the face of growing danger. Morning light filtered through threadbare curtains as Thomas surveyed the muddy street from the hotel window. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but dark clouds promised more to come. Across the street, the bandit from yesterday lounged against a hitching post with 2 companions, all 3 watching the hotel entrance. A soft knock announced Sarah's presence. She'd traded yesterday's muddy dress for a simpler traveling outfit, her hair neatly pinned beneath a practical bonnet. The ever-present purse hung securely at her side. We've got company. Thomas nodded toward the window. Sarah glanced out, her expression hardening at the sight of the men. They're persistent. It's not you they want, Thomas said. It's whatever you're carrying. My sister's homestead is a day's ride. Once I'm there, you'll still be alone, facing men willing to cut wagon wheels and threaten women in broad daylight. Thomas checked his revolver. Let me escort you to Miller's Creek. Sarah's independence warred with practicality on her face. I've managed alone this far, and fought admirably, Thomas acknowledged. But even the bravest fighter benefits from watching their back. Before she could answer, one of the men crossed the street toward the hotel. Sarah's hand tightened on her purse. We'll leave through the back. Thomas decided, My horse is behind the livery. Your wagon should be ready. They slipped out unnoticed, but their victory was short-lived. As Thomas hitched his horse to ride alongside Sarah's wagon, the three men appeared at the livery entrance. Leaving so soon? The bandit's cheek still showed the bruise from Sarah's purse. The lady's got something that doesn't belong to her. Everything I have is rightfully mine, Sarah said. The men spread out, hands hovering near their weapons. Thomas stepped forward, his movement subtle but his intention clear as his coat fell open to reveal his holstered Colt. Walk away, Thomas said quietly. This doesn't end well for you otherwise. Something in his tone made the men hesitate. When the bandit reached for his gun anyway, Thomas drew with surprising speed, firing a warning shot that splintered the wood by the man's head. Next one won't miss, Thomas promised. The confrontation ended with the men backing away, but their retreating glances promised this wasn't over. As they left town, Sarah studied Thomas with new eyes. You handle that gun like a man with ghosts, Mr. Hayes. Thomas adjusted his hat, scanning the horizon. All men have ghosts, Mrs. Matthews. Mine just taught me to shoot straight. Behind them. Sheriff Lowell watched their departure from the jailhouse window, his expression calculating as he dispatched a rider in the opposite direction. Wind howled through pine trees, bending them like dancers as the storm returned with vengeance. Thomas spotted the abandoned trapper's cabin just as the first hailstones struck, each icy projectile the size of a bullet. In there, he shouted over the wind, pointing to the crude shelter nestled against a rocky hillside. Sarah nodded, guiding her horse toward the cabin. By the time they reached the door, both were soaked to the bone, hail stinging their exposed skin. Thomas threw his weight against the swollen door, forcing it open with a groan of protest from ancient hinges. Inside was a single room with a stone fireplace, rough-hewn table, and little else. Not much, but it'll keep us dry, he said, immediately checking for unwelcome inhabitants. Finding none, he began gathering fallen wood from a collapsed section of roof. Sarah worked silently alongside him, wringing water from her skirts and laying out supplies. Her purse never left her person, even as she moved about the cabin. As darkness fell, a fire crackled in the hearth, casting warm light across their shelter. Outside, the storm raged with increasing fury, wind finding every crack and crevice. A particularly strong gust sent part of the roof crashing down. Thomas lunged forward, pulling Sarah clear as timber and debris fell where she'd been standing moments before. The sudden movement brought them closer than either had intended. For a breath, they remained still. The heat of the fire, no match for the warmth where their bodies touched. Sarah stepped back first, composing herself. Thank you. Together they secured what remained of the roof, their forced proximity breaking down barriers that words could not. Hours later, huddled near the fire for warmth, Sarah reached into her purse and withdrew a small object that caught the firelight. A locket. My daughter, she said softly, opening it to reveal a tiny curl of golden hair. Fever took her last winter. Thomas's expression softened. I'm sorry. This purse contains all I have left, her locket, and deeds to land my husband left when he passed. Not much to fight for, perhaps, but it's mine. She closed the locket carefully. What about your ghosts, Mr. Hayes? Thomas stared into the flames, silent so long Sarah thought he wouldn't answer. Had a ranch? Wife? Son. His voice grew rough. Fire took them while I was away on business, 3 years ago now. I'm sorry. Sarah echoed his earlier words. Been running since, taking odd jobs, never staying. He looked up, meeting her eyes across the fire. Hard to build something new when you couldn't protect what you had. I don't need a man to survive. Mr. Hayes, Sarah said, though her tone had softened. I never thought you did. He replied, But surviving ain't the same as living. The fire crackled between them, bridging a gap that had been narrowing since that first confrontation in town, as exhaustion claimed them. They settled on opposite sides of the hearth, Sarah clutching her purse in sleep while Thomas's hand never strayed far from his gun. Sarah stood frozen in the doorway of her sister's cabin, the midday sun illuminating evidence of hasty departure. An overturned chair, curtains torn from windows, a quilt abandoned on a loom, threads dangling like broken promises. "Ellen," she called, knowing already there would be no answer. Thomas appeared at her shoulder. No signs of struggle. They left in a hurry, but not under immediate threat. Sarah moved through the small cabin, fingers trailing over her sister's abandoned possessions. A hairbrush with strands of familiar dark hair, a child's wooden toy, whittled by hand. "She has 2 children," Sarah whispered. "Why would she leave?" The answer came from outside, where an elderly man approached from a neighboring homestead. His weathered face registered surprise at finding strangers at the abandoned property. "You'd be Sarah," he said, recognition dawning. "Your sister spoke of you." Where is she? What happened here?" The old man leaned on his walking stick. "Left near a month ago. Men started coming around, asking questions about water rights, making threats. She held out longer than most." "What men?" Thomas asked sharply. "Worked for some company buying up land hereabouts? Anything near the creek?" The neighbor's gaze settled on Sarah's purse. "That land deed in your purse, it's worth more than gold to the right people, or the wrong ones." While Sarah absorbed this news, Thomas discovered a crumpled document beneath a floorboard, a letter bearing the sheriff's seal alongside a land company's letterhead, demanding Ellen vacate the property. "Your sister's land and yours sit atop the only reliable water source for miles," Thomas explained, showing her the evidence. "Someone's consolidating control of the water. With Lowell involved, they've got the law on their side." "We need to expose them," Sarah insisted. "Take this to a territorial judge. The nearest judge is 3 days' ride, and Lowell's men are already tracking us." Thomas paced the small cabin. "We need supplies, ammunition, information." Their argument grew heated, Sarah wanting immediate action, Thomas urging caution. "I'll ride to the trading post at Copper Ridge," he finally said. "Get supplies, maybe learn who's behind this land grab. 2 hours there and back." Sarah watched him prepare to leave, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. "And if you don't return—" Thomas paused, their eyes meeting. "I will," as he mounted his horse. The distance between them seemed both physical and emotional, a gap neither was certain how to bridge. "Be careful," she said softly. Thomas nodded once, then rode away, the sound of hoofbeats fading into afternoon stillness. Hours passed with no sign of his return. As dusk approached, Sarah ventured down the path toward town, worry overcoming caution. 100 yards from the cabin, she found evidence that stopped her cold blood on the ground, signs of struggle, and Thomas's hat trampled in the dirt. The moon rose on an empty cabin, Sarah alone with the terrible certainty that Thomas had either abandoned her, or worse, been taken because of her. Dawn painted the eastern sky in watercolor hues as Sarah walked purposefully toward town. Her purse hung at her side, heavier now with the added weight of her sister's documents. Beneath her skirts, a kitchen knife offered minimal protection against what awaited. Each step brought fresh determination. If Thomas had betrayed her, she would face her enemies alone. If he'd been captured, she wouldn't abandon him as others had abandoned her. 2 miles from town, she heard rustling in the brush beside the road. She quickened her pace, hand moving to the concealed knife. "Sarah!" A hoarse voice called. She turned to see Thomas emerging from the trees, his face bloodied, right arm hanging awkwardly at his side. "You're alive," she whispered, relief washing over her before suspicion returned. "What happened?" "Ambush." He winced, touching a gash on his forehead. "Sheriff's men." They took me for questioning, but I managed to escape when they got careless. I found your hat. The blood. Her voice faltered. Thought you'd assume the worst. Thomas admitted, almost did myself. Sarah approached cautiously, studying his injuries. Why come back? You could have ridden on. Thomas met her gaze steadily. Same reason you're walking toward trouble instead of away from it. Some things matter more than safety. The truth of his words hung between them, a bridge slowly rebuilding trust. They continued toward town together, Thomas sharing what he'd learned during his capture. The land company was owned by a state senator who needed control of the water to support a planned railway. Sheriff Lowell was promised a position with the railway once the land was secured. As they neared Fairhaven, they were surprised by a woman emerging from a side path. Sarah tensed, but the stranger raised a hand in greeting. Mrs. Matthews, I'm Rebecca Winters. My husband owns the general store. She glanced nervously over her shoulder. Several of us ladies have been talking. What you did, standing up to Jenkins in the street, it's given some of us courage. Courage for what? Sarah asked. To stop pretending we don't see what Lowell and his men are doing to this town. To homesteaders like your sister. Rebecca pressed a folded paper into Sarah's hand. This is a list of folks willing to stand with you. Meet us at the back of the church at noon. After Rebecca departed, Thomas and Sarah discovered they had unexpected allies. Shopkeepers tired of paying protection money. Farmers whose land was threatened. Women who'd suffered the sheriff's unwanted attentions. By mid-morning, they had formed a plan. Sarah would publicly challenge Sheriff Lowell, drawing him into the open while Thomas and their allies gathered evidence from his office. As they prepared, Thomas touched Sarah's arm. This is dangerous. If something happens, I thought you'd left me. Sarah interrupted softly. Thomas's gaze held hers. Never, not while I still draw breath. Something shifted between them, trust solidifying into something deeper as they clasped hands briefly. Before separating to their positions, dawn's tentative light gave way to the full brightness of morning, illuminating a town on the verge of reclaiming itself from corruption's shadow. Fairhaven's town square bustled with midday activity as Sarah took her position near the well. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her expression remained composed as she deliberately removed her purse from her shoulder and placed it on the well's stone edge, bait for a trap long in the making. Thomas watched from the shadow of the mercantile, his injured arm bound, but his shooting hand free. Around the square, their allies moved into position. Rebecca near the church, the blacksmith outside his forge, 3 ranchers strategically placed near the jailhouse. Sheriff Lowell emerged from his office right on schedule, stopping short at the sight of Sarah standing alone in the open. His hand moved instinctively to his holster as he approached. Mrs. Matthews, he called, voice carrying across the square. Heard you've been asking questions about me. Dangerous habit for a woman in your position? Sarah stood her ground. And what position is that? Sheriff, alone, unwanted, causing trouble where you're not welcome. He glanced at the purse. Carrying things that don't rightly belong to you. Everything I have is mine by right, Sarah replied, voice steady despite the growing crowd of onlookers. Unlike some who take what isn't theirs, land, water, people's livelihoods. Lowell's face darkened. Careful, woman. I know about the water rights, Sarah continued, louder now. About the senator's railway plans. About how you've been forcing people from their homes. The sheriff's composure cracked. You fought so hard for that purse, now let's see what's worth dying for. It's not the purse, Sheriff, Sarah answered. It's the right to keep what's mine. Lowell lunged forward, grabbing for the purse in that moment. Thomas emerged from hiding, pistol drawn. The sheriff spun, drawing his own weapon, but found himself facing not only Thomas, but a dozen townspeople who had moved in behind him. It's over, Lowell, Thomas said quietly. The sheriff's deputy, the same man who'd attacked Sarah days earlier, appeared from the jailhouse, gun drawn for a heartbeat. Violence hung in the air like summer lightning. Then Rebecca's husband stepped forward, rifle in hand. "Put it down, Jenkins. You've taken enough from this town." One by one, townspeople revealed weapons, courage found in numbers. Lowell looked from face to face, recognition dawning that his power had evaporated. "The territorial marshal's been sent for," Thomas added, "with evidence of your land schemes." When Lowell made one final, desperate grab for his gun, Thomas fired, not to kill, but to disarm. The bullet striking the sheriff's shoulder. Jenkins surrendered without further resistance. As the former sheriff and his deputy were secured in their own jail, Sarah retrieved her purse and opened it before the gathered crowd. From inside, she withdrew the deeds and documents that proved not only her rightful ownership, but the conspiracy that had threatened so many. Justice, so long absent from Fairhaven, had finally found its way home. 2 weeks passed like a dream. Spring arrived overnight, it seemed, painting the landscape with tender green and the first wildflowers. On Sarah's property, the foundation of a new cabin took shape, each post and beam a testament to community rebuilt. Sarah watched from the edge of the cleared area as Thomas set the cornerstone, his movements confident despite his still healing arm. Around him, men and women from town worked together, the blacksmith hammering nails, Rebecca and her friends preparing midday meal, children carrying smaller pieces of lumber. A rider approached up the path, carrying letters and news. Among them, word that Sarah's sister and her children were safe in Montana territory, planning to return once the cabin was complete. The territorial marshal had arrested the senator's representatives, and the railway would reroute through properly purchased land. Small victories that together formed something larger: justice, community, hope. As afternoon shadows lengthened, the workers departed for town, leaving promises to return the next day. Thomas remained, checking the foundation's level one final time. Sarah approached, noting how he'd stored his tools with the precision of a man preparing to leave. "You're planning to move on?" It wasn't a question, but Thomas answered anyway. "Cabin's got good bones now. Won't need my help to finish." "And is that all you've been doing, helping with a cabin?" Sarah asked. Thomas straightened, finally meeting her eyes. The weeks of working side by side had worn away pretenses between them, leaving something raw and honest in their place. "Never intended to stay anywhere this long," he admitted. "Got used to moving on before it hurts to leave." Sarah moved to the half-finished porch where her empty purse hung on a post, deeds now properly filed. With the new town officials, her daughter's locket worn around her neck instead of hidden away. "That purse looks mighty empty now," Thomas observed. Sarah's fingers brushed the worn leather. "That's because it's waiting to be filled with something new, something worth building, not just fighting for." She turned to face him fully, spring sunlight catching in her hair. "I lost a family once. So did you. Doesn't mean we have to keep losing. Keep running." "What are you asking, Sarah?" His voice had dropped to a near whisper. "Stay." "Not as my protector or my builder." She took a step toward him. "As my partner." The distance between them closed, years of grief and loneliness giving way to the tentative promise of something new. His calloused hand found hers, weathered fingers intertwining. "Yes," he said simply. As the setting sun cast long shadows across the foundation of their new home, Sarah's empty purse swayed gently in the spring breeze, no longer a repository of the past, but a symbol of possibilities waiting to be gathered.